Route 4. Gietrzwałd, Cultural Park of the Warmia Landscape Road, Woryty, Giłwa Lake, Rentyny-Gietrzwałd. Cycling or walking 11 kilometers. Cultural Park of the Warmia Landscape Road. The landscape of Warmia, shaped by the centuries by man, is not only beautifully situated villages and towns, not only houses with sloping red roofs, churches with steeples, roadside chapels, but also local roads with beautiful trees, which are over 100 years old, most often lime trees, chestnuts, maples. Roadside alleys in Warmia and Missouri are especially valuable due to their nature, landscape and historical values. The roads were determined in the Middle Ages and are a heritage left by the Teutonic Order. At the beginning of the 19th century, they began to plant long-lived trees by the roads. In winter, they were to mark the communication route while the snow covered the fields and it was impossible to find it among the many-metre-high snowdrifts. In summer, they gave shadow to soldiers wandering to war and during peace to pilgrims. In June 2016, the Starost's office in Olsztyn, at the request of the Woryty Association, together with the Gietrzwałd municipality, created the Cultural Park of the Warmia Landscape Road Gietrzwałd to Woryty. The aim was to protect a 2-kilometre roadside avenue running between two villages. This is the first activity of this type in the country, and the Warmia Landscape Road is the first and only cultural park in the Warmia and Missouri province protected under the 2003 Act. Among the trees you can see several historic Warmian chapels. This is how the natural heritage is combined with cultural heritage, that is, man-made facilities. There are many roadside alleys in the province, but it is necessary not only to prove the natural and cultural values, but also the strong will of the residents to take such an alley under state protection. Woryty. Where does the name of the village come from? As well as the well-known writer Maria Zentara-Malewska describes in her collection of Warmian fairy tales and legends, it was like this. A long time ago, when the village had not yet been baptized, because only a dozen people lived here, an exhausted wanderer came. In the villages of Warmia, beggars as they were called, here were eagerly accepted for the night and served with warm food. A person could learn from the news from the distant world. He was welcomed with joy and given sumptuous supper. In gratitude, he told the hosts interesting facts and news until late at night. And when he had told them enough, they made a bedding for him by the stove so that he would be comfortable and warm. During the night, the host was awakened by the groans and grunts of the beggar. He got up, walked over to him, and asked what was wrong with him. The beggar replied that he had a terrible stomach ache. The host brought a few goose feathers, set them on fire, and let the beggar smell them, but it didn't help. In the morning, he noticed blue, dark spots on the beggar's hands. "Oh my God," shouted the host, "this is the Black Death in our cottage." He began to ask the beggar to take his sackcloth and flee the village as quickly as possible, because he would infect people with cholera. But the beggar lingered, groaned and renounced without moving from his bedding. People came and screamed, "Get out of here, your sackcloth, and you!" In the end, the beggar rose from his bedding and dragged with difficulty towards Gietrzwałd. He could still hear the screams of the angry villagers behind him for a long time, but the plague had already emerged from the sackcloth. From then on, the village was called Woryty. The name originated from the Polish word wór, meaning sack, and it has remained so until today. They said that all the people of the village died from the plague. Only a little boy was left. When he grew up, he built a little chapel that is by the road for God to thank for his saving. In every legend, as we know, there is always a grain of truth. But was it like that in this case? Although Woryty was founded 5 years earlier than Gietrzwałd, In other words, on February the 15th, 1347, by the same cathedral chapter in Frombork, it was always overshadowed by the Gietrzwałd route. The village settled in the Prussian field Gudikus, on the edge of Warmia. Civilization slowly entered in here. The hard-working Warmians lived in harmony, helping each other to rebuild their farms after army marches and plagues. The first school was built here at the beginning of the 19th century. In 1825, 43 children were taught exclusively in Polish by a relatively young graduate of the school in Barczewo, Andrzej Hermanowski. In the plebiscite vote of July the 11th, 1920, 237 people voted for East Prussia and 101 for Poland. The Polish Catholic private school, with Polish as the language of instruction, as the full name suggested, was established on February the 24th, 1930. The school was established in Jan Samolowski's house, who, on January the 1st, 1935, sold the building and the adjacent square to the Association of Polish School Societies. After the renovation of the rooms, the largest room was destined to a classroom, and the Polish Guzday family lived in the two smaller ones on the ground floor. The room in the attic was taken by the poor workman Anna Gruber with her daughter Maria. She was the only student who, after the closure of the Polish school in Gietrzwałd, moved to Woryty to continue her education. The first teacher of the Polish school in Woryty was Victor Binner, who came from Greater Poland. After the school in Gietrzwałd was closed in 1933, the Germans tried to do the same with the school in Woryty. It was instigated by the head of the regional subgroup Bund Deutscher Osten Petrikowski and the school inspector Dr. Franz Pasternak. During one of the numerous visits, Pasternak managed to find in a student's school bag during a lesson an extended prayer book entitled God and Homeland, with excerpts from the history of Poland, which he had just received as a Christmas gift from the Association of Polish School Societies in Germany. This incident led to the teacher being accused of distributing a book that was banned in Germany. Any explanations did not help. In a letter of July the 20th, 1933, the president of Olsztyn Regency deprived Victor Binner of the right to teach and ordered him to leave East Prussia. The school in Woryty was not in danger of liquidation. Conducted systematically, cultural and educational work favoured the influx of new students. As in other Polish schools, some students came and others left, often for financial reasons, due to depriving large families of winter aid, Kinderhilfe, or threatening them to lose their job, and we should remember that they were poor families. The school was frequently visited by Franz Pasternak, who was very unfavourable towards teachers and students of Polish schools. He found various minor inaccuracies and was strict in complying with German law. The teacher, Franciszek Piotrowski, described one incident in his memories. Dr. Pasternak appeared again for the visit. This time he was interested in other matters in my school, personal and family relations of some students. Pedagogical documentation that I kept, the Telefunken radio station at the front door. He looked at it and, saying nothing, turned the knob. After his departure, we found that he had switched away from Warsaw to the Deutschlandsender. From then on, Bronek Meller, sitting at the station in the back of the class, set it up for Berlin every day after hearing news from the country. We admired this boy's conspiratorial intelligence. Pasternak could never surprise him either, because Bronek had a window in front of him and he could see one road, which the enemy could come up even in a bent position, which, as it was known, sometimes he did. After the war, Maria Gruber, a former student, lived in the school building with her parents. Currently, her descendants live in this house. In 1957, on the facade of the building in Woryty, where the Polish school was located, a commemorative plaque was placed with the inscription, "In the years 1930 to 1939, there was a Polish school. Certificate of Polishness, Warmia and Missouri." Walking around this neat, clean village on a sunny summer day, you are amazed by its old, pre-war buildings. Residential and farm buildings are in the same condition as they were once built. The layout of the village is linear, that is, along the road and on both sides of it. There are houses with farm buildings located inside the homestead. This type of settlement was already characteristic of rural layouts in the Middle Ages. It was not until the mid-19th century that development began to take the form of the village colonies. Typical buildings in the Varmian countryside, which include Woryty, are buildings built on a rectangular plan, wooden or made of red brick, single story with a usable attic, preceded by a porch with gable roofs, covered with straw until the mid-19th century, then with red tiles. In wooden construction, which is not common in the region, a decorative pasdo was crowning the gables of the roof. Porches were often added, sometimes arcades. Window openings were decorated with blue, brown, or green shutters. Compared to other Varmian settlements, fate was very gentle with Woryty. Due to its remote location, the village was not affected by the Red Army's winter offensive. There was no fire here, and the local population didn't suffer, except for the men who did not return from the war. The village also avoided the plague of looters. There were basically no abandoned farms, which in the first post-war months were settled by people expelled from the former Polish territories in the east. The entire local population adopted Polish citizenship, except for 5 or 6 families who considered themselves Germans. As early as 1945, these families emigrated to the west. The trips to Germany started here a few years after the war. The reason was not the awareness of belonging to the German nation. The post-war perspective for the indigenous people of Varmia did not look very encouraging. The authorities gave the impression that they were looking unfavourably at the owners of large farms. In the interwar period, many Varmians left for work, mostly in the mines in Westphalia. Some people returned after a few years and used the money earned there to buy land and organise their farms. Some people returned to Varmia only to get married here and return to Germany with their wives. Life was easier there. Letters from families in Westphalia began to come to Woryty, in which their relatives were persuaded to move to Germany. Incomparably better living conditions and help in the initial farming were described. There were no special problems with completing the formalities related to the departure. Germany welcomed such families. The condition was the place of birth in the territory of former East Prussia, and then Poland did not pose any obstacles for those who were determined to leave. About 20 families left Woryty in the first post-war years. They included people who attended a local Polish school in the 1930s, as well as mixed marriages. The departing persons sold their properties to the locals or transferred them to the state treasury. Displaced people from the former Polish eastern borderlands were settled on these farms. The locals quickly integrated with the newcomers. There were no special problems with communication. Customs and culinary tastes infused, the newcomers were eager to learn from the native Varmian dialect. So that in a relatively short time in Woryty, again almost all of them talked in a Varmian dialect. In the village itself and its immediate vicinity, there are as many as 10 chapels. 6 located along the main road, the remaining 4 are located outside Woryty, on the roads to Rentyny, and Gietrzwałd. The chapels were built mainly in the form of a slender structure on a square plan as 1, 2, and 3-story buildings. One of them is plastered, the rest are made of red brick. Out of this large number, it is worth mentioning this one located in the village centre at a crossroads, surrounded by 3 really old lime trees. The bell-type chapel has a very extensive outline. It is high and multi-part with lots of niches with votive figures. The top story is a clearance, there is a cross and a small bell tower in it. The whole structure is covered with a tent canopy. A good example of a chapel is the colony is the one located northeast of Gietrzwałd on the road to Rentyny. It has inverted proportions. In other words, the body is mounted on a narrower plinth. The atmosphere of this building is created by its surroundings, accompanied by old lime trees, and in the summer is almost invisible, as if hiding behind a green wall. Planting trees around the built chapels is also an ancient tradition, the effects of which we admire today. All the chapels, regardless of their location, are in a very good condition. 6 chapels are entered in the Register of Monuments. There are old customs connected with a chapel located in the centre of the village, on St. Roch Square, the patron of Woryty. While on St. Roch's Day, August the 16th, at dawn, peasants gathered in the square, brought their cows and walked around the cross with them 3 times, praying to the patron for health for the animals. Then they went on a pilgrimage, in Warmian dialect, Wasiera, to the churches in Gietrzwałd and Jonkowo, the latter dedicated to St. Roch, where they made gifts for the health of animals. In recent years, the inhabitants, referring to tradition, have reactivated the custom of blessing animals. It takes place during the Holy Mass on the first Saturday after St. Roch's Day at the Cross. Then the annual Woryty festival begins. Giłwa Lake. There are 4 lakes in the Gietrzwałd municipality: Świętajno-Naterski, Giłwa, Sarong, and Łęguty. Giłwa Lake, also known as Rentyny Lake, is one of the prettiest and most frequently visited. The first name comes from the Giłwa River flowing through it, the second from the nearby town of Rentyny. The lake has a poorly developed shoreline. The southern and eastern shores are surrounded by forests. The western shores are overgrown with meadows or used for cropland. Here you can find floating leaves such as yellow water lily and white water lily, as well as reeds and lesser reedmus. The submerged vegetation is usually charas, buttercups, and coontails. The lake is full of various fish. Numerous are bream, common rudd, pike, perch, and roach. Hence, the nearby accommodation, guest houses, and agritourism are popular among fishermen. Many elements of Warmian customs are based on beliefs from pre-Christian times, connected with water. One of the most popular figures of folk demonology is the Chłobok, also called Wataniec, Chłobod, Złe. On the one hand, he was in the service of the devil, and on the other hand, he looked after the farm if its owners took care of him. For example, they gave him scrambled eggs and bacon on their doorstep. The Chłobok took the form of a wet black hen, sometimes a duck, a goose, a crow, or a cat. This demon derived from the religious beliefs of the ancient Slavs and has undergone some transformations in Poland. It has been mixed up with other related characters, such as the spirit who looks after the house, or the dwarves. The Christian religion, striving to eliminate pagan beliefs, identified demoniological creatures with unclean forces, hence the frequent identification of the Chłobok with the devil. Another demoniological figure important in the area of lakes and rivers is Topnik, also known as Topich. According to the beliefs of Warmia and Mazuri, this spirit lives in lakes and draws people who approach them carelessly. Parents often warned their children not to approach the water by themselves, as they would be drawn in by the Topich. He took the form of an emaciated boy in a too long wet shirt and hair flowing over his shoulders, who appeared above the surface of the water and looked like a drowned man. Zmora, also known as Mara, is a half-demon, that is, a badly baptized child who suffocated people in their sleep. Mara comes from ancient beliefs in the souls of dead women who harass people. In In the 17th and 18th centuries, Mara was probably attributed to the properties of a witch, suffocating people or sucking their blood. The inhabitants of the region of that time also believed in witches putting an evil spell on adults or babies, as well as in dwarfs, sometimes called kautki. They were good spirits, comparable to the elves who lived under the bushes in the backyard gardens or in the hut behind the stove, and helped people with various household chores. Oscar Kohlberg, referring to Max Turpin, mentions the Masurian beliefs about dwarfs, that is, podziomki that bring diseases, and kautki that help people with various household chores. But the strangest of the strangest things were made by Schmentek, just outside Gietrzwałd, in the village of Woryty. You would say he founded a competitive capital here. All the inhabitants of Woryty tell me about these still relatively recent events. The devilishness took over the house of the farmer Grus, still standing in the village. The fact it threw objects and haunted this house was nothing. But once the carriage with 4 black horses arrived there, the door to the house opened and closed, letting in someone invisible. Someone from the townspeople saw a black cat with a paw above a candle in the window. There were monsters wandering around the house. The maid was carrying the nettles for the piglet, and she met the headless peasant. Grus couldn't stand it anymore, and he bought a sorcerer to free him from it. The sorcerer began to do his thing, and a nosy farmer climbed under the window. It took him, and it caught him, and it made him wallow into the swamp under the window in the pond. The local housekeeper, Wojciechowska, showed me this house, and she too saw Kłobuk when she was young. In the stables, the Mara braided the manes. Wojciechowska took these horse braids between the stones and hit Mara that was sitting in them. It helped. This is what Maciej Wańkowicz, who visited Woryty in 1935 at the invitation of Franciszek Piotrowski, the head of the Polish school, wrote about spirits and devils. He immortalized the events in Woryty, which the inhabitants told him in his book Na tropach Śmiątka. Rentyny. Today, it is a holiday village, and according to the Geographical Dictionary of the Kingdom of Poland and other Slavic countries, it was founded before 1383. This year, the Warmia chapter confirmed the granting of 8 włokash, unit of measurement, to Rentyny under the Chełmno law. Originally, there was an inn in the village, which was then moved to another place. Rentyny was mentioned again in a document from 1656. At that time, they owned 12 włokash of land. The name of the village refers to the Prussian settlement, similar to Rapaty and Woryty. The village is located entirely in the forest, so access by car is quite difficult, but possible. High terrain clearances and beautiful landscape views are an unquestionable advantage of this village. An old wooden cottage and a few chapels testify to the Warmian identity.